For decades, you've been told the Vikings' time in America was just a brief, failed experiment, nothing more than a complete footnote before Columbus. But advanced science has uncovered proof they stayed far longer and ranged much farther than anyone believed. If the history books are this wrong, what else have we missed? Let's dig into the evidence and rethink everything we know about the Norse in America. The textbook version of Viking America is tidy and short. It tells of a single voyage, a clash with local peoples, and a quick retreat. But that neat story leaves out the daily realities that shaped Norse life on the edge of the Atlantic. When Norse settlers arrived in Greenland near the end of the 10th century, led by Eric the Red, they found a land rich in grazing but almost bare of trees. The valleys and fjords offered grass for livestock, but the only wood came as driftwood along the shorelines or as low, stunted birch and willow. For building ships, repairing roofs, or making tools, this was nowhere near enough. Ship timber became a lifeline. In Greenland, wood was not just a convenience, it was a strategic resource, as precious as iron or grain. Icelandic law codes and saga passages show how fiercely wood was regulated and how much value was placed on even a single straight trunk. Archaeological digs at Greenlandic farms have uncovered beams and planks that could only have come from forests hundreds of miles away. These were not accidental finds. They point to a deliberate effort to seek out and bring back timber from distant shores. Sagas describe Greenlanders sailing west to lands they called Markland and Vinland, not only to explore but to harvest the forests they desperately lacked at home. The contrast is clear in their own words. Greenland was treeless, but the lands across the sea were thick with trees big enough for ship keels and house beams. Every major Norse outpost in the North Atlantic, whether in Iceland, the Faroes, or Greenland, had to look beyond its horizon for the materials that kept their society afloat. This was not a culture built on one-time adventures. The evidence points to a network of supply, with the forests of North America acting as a crucial extension of Greenland's fragile resource base. The old story of a single failed experiment starts to look less like history and more like a myth once the basic needs of Norse settlers come into focus. The search for timber alone would have demanded repeated crossings, careful planning, and a willingness to risk the open sea again and again. What comes next is not just a question of who got here first, but why they kept coming back. In 1960, a Norwegian couple arrived on the windswept tip of Newfoundland, following clues from ancient sagas and the shape of the land itself. Helga Ingstad, an explorer with a taste for lost frontiers, and N. Stein Ingstad, an archaeologist with a keen eye for detail, began to ask the local fishermen about odd mounds buried under the grass. What they found would rewrite the story of European contact with the Americas. Beneath layers of peat and centuries of silence, the Ingstads uncovered the remains of 8 turf-walled buildings. The layout matched the classic Norse style, rectangular halls and workshops with thick sod walls, timber frames and central hearths for warmth and light. The buildings were not scattered or haphazard. They formed a small, organized settlement capable of sheltering 70 to 90 people at its busiest. The construction echoed the architecture of Viking homes in Iceland and Greenland, but stood alone on this side of the Atlantic. Artifacts surfaced from the soil, a bronze cloak pin of unmistakably European design, iron rivets from ship repair, and a spindle whorl that spoke to the presence of women in the camp. Each find chipped away at the old belief that only men braved these distant shores. The ironwork, in particular, revealed skills and technology unknown in indigenous Newfoundland at the time, confirming a Norse origin. The spindle whorl, small and unassuming, offered quiet proof that this was more than a raiding party. It was a community, however temporary. The site's significance grew with every season of excavation. In 1978, UNESCO recognized Meadows as a World Heritage Site, the first and only confirmed Viking settlement in North America. The evidence was undeniable. Here, on the edge of the continent, Norse people had built, worked, and lived. The myth of a fleeting visit gave way to the reality of timber-framed walls and the everyday objects left behind. Meadows became the foundation for every new investigation into the Norse in America, its sod walls anchoring the search for a deeper story. 1,000 years ago, a solar storm swept across the Earth, flooding the atmosphere with cosmic rays. This event, recorded in 992 CE, left a sharp, unmistakable spike of radiocarbon in tree rings from Japan to Newfoundland. Centuries later, scientists at the University of Groningen would use this cosmic fingerprint to solve a mystery that had frustrated archaeologists for decades. When exactly were the Vikings in North America? The team, led by Margot Kuitems and Michael D., turned to wood unearthed at Meadows. 3 pieces bore the telltale marks of metal blades, clean, angled cuts impossible to achieve with stone tools. Working in the lab, the researchers measured the radiocarbon in each annual ring, searching for the sudden rise that marked the solar storm. Once they found it, all that remained was to count the rings from the 992 CE spike out to the bark edge. The answer was as precise as a calendar. The trees had been felled in 1021 CE. This was more than a technical achievement. For the first time, European presence in the Americas could be pinned to a single exact year, 471 years before Columbus. No more guessing within a blurry window of decades. The Norse were here, cutting wood and building with tools brought across the Atlantic in the autumn of 1021 CE. The cosmic event had become a timestamp, transforming ancient timbers into a record as reliable as any written chronicle. The question that now loomed was not whether the Vikings came, but how long they stayed and how far their journeys might have reached. Butternut shells, scattered among the remains at Meadows, raise questions that simple timelines cannot answer. Butternut trees grow hundreds of miles south, in the warmer forests of New Brunswick and the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Their presence on the northern tip of Newfoundland means Norse travelers must have sailed far beyond their base camp, deep into lands rich with resources they could not find at home. These nuts were not just drifted in by chance. They were carried, likely as food or perhaps for their oil, by people who knew exactly where to find them. Other clues point in the same direction. At the site, archaeologists uncovered jasper fire starters, a stone traced to Notre Dame Bay, nearly 200 kilometers to the south. The variety of wood species in Norse artifacts, some local and others from distant forests, suggests repeated expeditions through different ecological zones. Isotope analysis of metal and bone reveals materials gathered at different times of year across multiple seasons. The pattern is unmistakable. This was not a single visit, but a series of journeys, each one pushing the Norse horizon a little farther. The search for new sites has turned high-tech. In 2016, archaeologist Sarah Parkak used satellite imagery to scan Newfoundland's southwest coast for signs of Norse activity. At Point Rosie, her team identified what looked like turf walls and a hearth for roasting bog iron ore, a technique known from Viking settlements. Initial excitement ran high, but further excavation revealed only natural bog formations. The debate over Point Rosie highlights both the promise and the pitfalls of remote archaeology. Clues from space can guide the way, but only careful digging can distinguish ancient hands from nature's own work. Meanwhile, the old sagas tell of at least 5 separate expeditions to Vinland. Thorfinn Karlsefni's party brought not just explorers, but cattle and supplies for long-term settlement. Climate records show that the seas between Greenland and North America stayed navigable until the 1300s, giving Norse sailors decades, if not centuries, to return. Piece by piece, the evidence builds toward a new picture. The Norse presence in America was broader, longer, and more complex than anyone once imagined. Every new layer of Norse evidence rewrites the boundaries of our continent's history. As scientific methods sharpen, the question shifts from whether Vikings lingered to what else lies beneath our assumptions. The past isn't fixed. It is waiting to be uncovered. What story do we still overlook?